I believe we are live. So thanks for coming again to the next session of the Community Hub. So for those who have been coming to the Community Hub, which was in person in Clifton, this is just a temporary continuation virtually for now. We do hope to still continue in person in coming weeks, but the masjid is still assessing the situation for when things can go live again. So for now and for the foreseeable future, we're still staying virtual. Um, and yeah, and so then for today's session, we're going to continue the interview format, which we had done in previous community hub. So again, the community hub in general was designed to be this program where we try to make the Muslim community feel like there's a place to come and connect both with the scholars, but both with other members of the community. So it's overall not just about lectures and learning, but also about connecting with other Muslims. Virtual, it's a little bit less of that, but we're doing what we can with it. So the interview format we thought was nice because it's at least I've been finding it very useful myself personally. I think it's been great. I've been loving the opportunity to get to do it because it feels like we're building a bridge here because I'm me just a member of the community and between Sheikh Osama and the scholars. It's nice to be able to build that bridge between the scholars and the community, that we can talk to them and have that discussion, be with them. So we feel like we have the scholars addressing what's actually happening in the community. When I get to talk back and forth, I can ask Sheikh to clarify things, and it could be broken down in terms like the layman like us can understand. And it feels like our questions are being answered, and it helps us feel like we're actually dealing with the real issues that are happening in the community and looking at things from the community. So personally, I think it's been a great format for getting knowledge to the members of the community. And so then as far as the actual topic for tonight, if you see, it's called The Ideal Muslim Between Theory and Reality. So why this topic? So, I mean, about trying to figure out what is the ideal Muslim. Of course, it's obvious that topic would make sense. Everyone wants to know what type of Muslim to be, how they should live. That makes sense. But in particular, this idea of between theory and reality, we thought would be important because there is the idea of what one thinks a Muslim should be. But and then someone could be trying very hard to be a good Muslim, but they might be overwhelmed by all the things that there is to do. And what should they do? What's the pathways they should go into? There's a lot of ways to be. There's a lot of responsibilities in Islam. How should one deal with all those obstacles, and how should one think about approaching their Muslim life? So we thought that's a practical question for those who are trying to strive for Allah. So we thought that would be an important topic, and I think that is all from my end. And Sheikh, I don't know if you want to say a few words before we get going.
Yeah, sure. I think I've made it, tried to make it a sunnah in the community hub, and I guess in our majalis and our gatherings in general, just to start on a very spiritual note, with a little bit of dua. Even if we're not in the same proximity, not in the same location, perhaps the blessings of dua will touch us wherever we may be, and bring that barakah and that goodness into our homes. So I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal, blesses this program, blesses the session. Jazakallah khair, Akhi Ahmed, for taking the time to moderate it and have the discussion and the conversation with me. But before I guess we get into it, we say, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala sayyidina rasulillah, وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه اللهم لك الحمد كله لك الشكر كله لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت سبحانك كما أثنيت على نفسك اللهم صل وسلم على حبيبك وعبدك المختار سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين بارك اللهم لنا في أعمالنا وفي أعمالنا وفي أرزاقنا وفي أهلنا وذوينا وأحبابنا اللهم اهدنا لمرضاتك اللهم اهدنا لمرضاتك واملأ قلوبنا بحبك وحب نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم اللهم املأ قلوبنا وبيوتنا بنورك ورحمتك وهداك. Oh Allah, we call upon you and we pray to you, we beseech you, we ask you by your names and attributes that you fill our homes and our hearts with your abundant light, with nur, with guidance, and that you make us a people of goodness wherever we may be. We ask you, O Allah, to bless our lives and our livelihood, to bless our families, to bless our time in this dunya, and to make us of those who inch closer to your pleasure with every passing day of our lives. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Jazakallah khair, Akhi Ahmed, for starting us off with that. And I guess, for starters, I want to reiterate what you said. I enjoy this conversation. And, I guess this conversation in the platform of the community hub will hopefully inspire people to invest time in the conversation. And what I mean by that actually is, you know, faith is an investment. My growth is an investment. My journey to Allah Azza wa Jal requires an investment. If I am to grow through my life experiences, I need to be willing to have conversations in pursuit of guidance, conversations with those around me. Hopefully this type of conversation could be replicated at home, between spouses, between parents and children. If we don't talk about our life journey and the challenges it poses and the hopes and pursuits that we have, then it'll make having clear perspective on life that much more difficult to attain. We need to have conversations among each other, and that's why this is actually the sunnah of the companions and the early generations. They would sit with each other and they would remind each other of Allah Azza wa Jal, and they would reflect with each other. Hayya nu'min sa'a. Come together so that we may revive our faith for an hour. This idea is beautifully implemented through modern halaqat and in different masajid, and it's a beautiful sunnah and practice to have, and it should be something that's in every one of our lives. So, I just wanted to, qualify your statement with that, and I guess going into the subject, the whole idea of the ideal Muslim. Um, we carefully chose that title to try to address a few different things that perhaps might be personal struggles that people have, and really figuring out how to quote unquote become religious, how to have a comprehensive Muslim personality, what they should invest their time in terms of their personal religious growth, or spiritual growth, and also because to address that idea of idealism and the role it plays in, I guess you could say, creating some misconceptions in the minds of people about relationships and about life, and about religion and the journey to Allah Azza wa Jalla as well. So I guess that that's how I feel also about the title and the choice of topic. So feel free to dig into the meat, Akhi Ahmed.
Okay, just like a look again. And by the way, I just got an idea. I know we didn't discuss this, but I think maybe not this. I don't know. I doubt we're gonna have time to do any Q&A at the end. But I guess since we have the platform pretty easy, where people can send in through YouTube or Facebook, feel free to, I think, send in your questions. No promises that we're going to get to it, but we might, in case if you want throughout the talk, and maybe at some point we will in the future. So, okay.
Sure.
Okay, so I think as Sheikh has mentioned, the concept, we want to start with the concept of idealism, because we're titling it the ideal Muslim, right? But that word can be a tricky word. What does ideal mean? It could be a dangerous word, we think, right? So how should we want to start asking you how we should start to think about the word ideal, especially when it comes to a person, because we know by definition no one's perfect, right? Because we know that that there's the hadith that if you were if you were not to commit sins, Allah would have swept you out of existence and would have replaced you by another people who have committed sins, and then they asked for forgiveness from Allah, and He would have granted them forgiveness. So the message there is that Allah created us to make errors so that we can ask for forgiveness. So we know we're starting off with this idea of imperfection. So then how should we, starting with that, think about ideal Muslim?
Jazakallah khair. For me, when I think of ideal, it automatically brings to my mind this idea of expectations. When you're talking about the, ideal marriage or the ideal relationship, it's often linked with, people having certain expectations from others, and or from certain relationships they have in their life, and um many times those types of expectations can lead to a sense of disheartenment and failure when it doesn't go as you expect, if you know what I mean. When people realize or view their faith or what it means to be religious from a standpoint of idealism, I think it really gives a false perception of what the journey to Allah Azza wa Jal is all about. It's not about idealism. No, not at all. Sometimes people, when they start coming around the masjid, they think that um, being a quote unquote faithful and devoted believer automatically means that you're supposed to be uh, to a certain standard where you don't make certain mistakes, where you don't have certain mishaps, and you don't slip up in a certain way, where you don't violate certain basic morals and ideals and character. And that's not really true. Nothing, hardly anything about life is ideal. Yeah, we can strive for ideals. We can strive for an ideal situation or circumstance, but it's so important to realize that we're all growing. Like you said in that beautiful hadith, we're all growing. We have our challenges, we have our struggles. If I think automatically that those around me are somehow supposed to be perfect, and if they're not, then I don't want them in my life, then I'm gonna have a lot of heartache in my personal life. If I somehow think that just quote unquote becoming religious makes is supposed to make a person a perfect individual, then I'm also gonna be disheartened a lot in my life. And life shows us this a lot. People, they have a certain image of even people in position, or imams, teachers, scholars, and when certain situations happen that are far less than what you'd expect of such a person, it makes people have a doubt in their faith, and it makes people start having insecurities, and of course that's really, really dangerous. It's very concerning. So having a very idealistic, sugar coated outlook and perspective on what it means to journey to Allah can also lead to the person to um self-loathe. If I think this journey is supposed to be glamorous, beautiful, and easy, I have another thing coming. You could look at the lives of the companions, look at the controversy and some of the fitan that came during their time when the Prophet ﷺ was still there. It's not about being perfect at all. If I think the journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is supposed to be glamorous, then I haven't realized the verse which says, حَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. That people think they're going to just believe and they're not going to be tested. The imperfections of life are what actually bring us a little bit closer to the idea of human perfection. Life's not perfect, but it's those imperfections and those struggles and that adversity that actually teaches us a lot about life and about ourselves. Allah, and I guess that's how it started off. But there's a lot to examine when it comes to the life of the Prophet, the companions, to reflect on. That could be really inspiring for anyone who has that mistrust, or has made those mistakes and thinks that perhaps they're not loved. How many people have done things in their personal life, or experienced things in their personal life, that really made them feel that perhaps their circumstance in this dunya is because Allah doesn't love them. I don't know if you've ever thought of this, Akhi Ahmed, but like it's a thing. The whole idea of prosperity doctrine. People looking at their circumstance, and when they see their life is difficult, hard, that nothing's working out, they automatically translate that as, okay, this must be because my status in the eyes of Allah isn't really good. And of course, we don't have that idea in our religion, in our deen. If Allah loves you, He'll test you. If Allah loves you, He'll send difficulties your way that'll help you, give you perspective on things. Wallahu alam, man.
So I mean, so I think you took the the concept of idealism in general way beyond the concept of ideal Muslim, just like the issue of idealism in general. We look at life from idealism, that life shouldn't be ideal. A person's not going to be ideal. Nothing is ideal. And it seems like it gets at the nature of how this dunya is created. This dunya is created to not be ideal, right? And really only, and correct me if I'm wrong, if it's right to say, it's really only Allah and if it's wrong to say that, and Jannah is ideal, really. But other than those two things, there's really not an ideal. So I think the importance of getting to this right is because we're talking about this concept of an ideal Muslim, but the word can get us in trouble when we're talking about it. So since we know that there's no such thing as ideal, then what type of Muslim are we really looking at? I think a better way to look at it is we're looking at it. What is the ideal, realistic Muslim? Is that the best way? Should realistically ideal Muslim, something like that.
Yeah, the realistically ideal Muslim. I like that. No, being real is. I guess the more people, the more people experience in life, it gives like a seasoned perspective on things. I think like when people lack experience with relationships and with just trials in general, they have this like very very hopeful, sometimes I guess you could say, uh, you know, fairy tale image of how things are supposed to go. But when they're struck with the reality of life, it gives them a seasoned perspective of what to really expect from people, what to really expect from relationships, what to really expect from the trials of life, and so on and so forth. And that's not to say, but it's a gentle balance. I think if you deal with youth, you'll see this. You'll see like they're just full of life and so innocent and so willing to give. And then, as people age and they experience things, they become less, willing to sacrifice time or sacrifice their personal stuff, or the more skeptical, I guess, of others. And of course, that needs to be balanced out because, sometimes people could become very, very stoic, very, um, skeptic of others, very have a very toxic view of community and of society, and have a hopeless view of humanity, and that happens from a lot of pain. Yeah, they get a seasoned experience through a lot of tests, but I guess the key here is how to really balance and maintain a healthy perspective, between the theory, the gullible theory, and the seasoned reality that people end up having when they go through the experience of life. And if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think, and the balance of how to think of that, I think is interesting too. Is, I mean, so that you don't want to look at people too ideal. So, like, for example, maybe you'll take the example of well, because you gave, I think, three, at least two good examples where it was how we might look at our role models or our leaders, and if we idealize the concept of what these, leaders should be like, or our role models should be like, then when they end up not being perfect, we write them off or something. Or like you said, I think that when we ourselves think that we should be this level of idealism, then when we fall short, we're demotivated. Um, but then how do you mentioned the balance though, but what about on the other path of, okay, so then there's not gonna be an ideal, but then how do we, what's that line from the other side though, where we say, well, no one's perfect, then you just end up not caring about any sort of, you don't hold yourself or anyone else to any standards. So what is the middle ground there? I know it's not an easy answer, but
No, really good, and Jazakallah khair for following up with that. Because I think for me the middle ground is, as the quicker I understand that life is meant to be full of imperfections, trials, and adversities, and that those trials, adversities, and imperfections are actually for my betterment, my perspective will completely shift. Because what happens is, all right, well, I perceive family supposed to interact in X fashion and X manner, and when I don't find that the case, then I'm just going to quickly turn my back and free my hands from this mess because it's all toxic and it's a problem and I don't like it. uh but the way I try to perceive it, and I think that the seed of the Prophet ﷺ shows us this, is, the Prophet ﷺ benefited from having the likes of an Abu Lahab in his life, an uncle who was his antagonist, a very toxic person. It taught him a lot about how to deal with certain types of individuals, because again, if I'm looking for my family to be perfect, if I'm looking for my marriage to be perfect, if I'm looking for my friends to be perfect, I'm going to find myself really isolated in life. And that's the whole idea here. The quicker I realize that I'm meant to embrace my reality, the quicker I'll be able to grow through those grueling experiences, those bitter experiences. No one likes to experience bitterness, and to be honest with you, but I bet you most people, in retrospect, I bet you a lot of people who have, some wisdom and understanding in retrospect, when they look back at their lives and they remember all the trials and difficulties they had to overcome, they will realize and appreciate that those difficulties really built their character and really taught them a lot. So it's not about like, so that's more of where I'm coming from, if you understand, like realizing what life's really about, what the journey to Allah is about, and embracing all that entails, and growing through the process. Allah alam.
No. Okay. So I think we got a good foundation there to then get into the actual topic of the ideal Muslim. Unless I can ask more on it, but I do think it's we can transition at this point unless you think otherwise.
Sure.
Um, so okay, so again we talk about there's no so I'm gonna call it right for the future until it gets too annoyingly repetitive. The ideal realistic Muslim. Um, so when we're trying to think about the ideal realistic Muslim, um, we look at all the things there is to do in Islam. It seems like there's a lot of things, right? There's the spiritual aspects where we'd have all these rituals of worship. We have the prayer and dhikr and all this kind of thing. And there's that aspect of Islam. There's the idea of seeking ilm, seeking knowledge, and all the effort that comes in with that. And then actually doing works for people or for society and things like that. And you could probably make the list in buckets even larger if needed, right? But then you look at all this kind of stuff. It looks like there's a lot of things to do. So is the ideal Muslim that's realistic involved in everything, or are they focused on one thing in general? How do you think about all these various avenues of the deen?
Jazakallah khair, Akhi Ahmed. I think that's a really good question. To be honest, one of the beautiful things that I love about our Islam and our deen is there's no cookie cutter model to what it means to worship Allah, to what it means to be a good person. It's not a monolith by any fashion. Everything in our life is very, very diverse in nature in our existence. And, people are just as much diverse as the universe around us. And I guess in that vein, I love how our deen gives so many different opportunities for people to, I guess, excel at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened before them, what Allah made accessible to them, if you know what I mean. Because, no one has everything. No one at all has everything in terms of goodness in life. And everyone has something. And I think, once I realize that, you know, it'll, I guess, uh, be an inspiration point for someone out there who thinks that they might not have a lot to offer. They're dead wrong. No, not at all. Everyone has something good to offer. And the beautiful thing about our Islam is it allows people to excel in different fields. And all of that, those different facets of life that are good. And just to give you an example, look at the companions themselves. Were they all scholars? No, they were not all scholars whatsoever. There were tens of thousands of companions. There were some very notable scholars among them, brilliant minds. So that's a door for some. Some of them, their door was their generosity. They were very, very intelligent, witty business people, like Abdurrahman ibn Auf. A scholar would be like Ibn Abbas or Ibn Umar. A very intelligent business person would be like Abdurrahman ibn Auf or Uthman bin Affan. They used the resources that Allah gave them, the abilities, the talents they had to go down a certain path in their journey. Other people, you find them, they're models of ubad and zuhd and asceticism and devotion and worship. And you find that in Ahl Sufa. These were companions who were downright poor. They did not have the material advantages of life, but they had a lot of goodness to offer. And the Prophet realized this, and the Prophet kept them near. And the Quran mentioned their favor and their virtue. And you'll find other examples from among the companions of people. Some people, their role in their life was being a good mother. Look at the example of the mother of Anas ibn Malik. Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik, the one who his mother was wise enough, smart enough to decide for her son that she wants him to be in the constant presence of the Prophet. She wanted him to grow up in his tutelage and to be in his service. And a very smart mother, because she opened a door of goodness for her son that stayed with him the rest of his life. She had, a vision, if you know what I mean. And her role in this was being a beautiful mother, a very inspiring mother. Many other examples that you could possibly think of among the diverse pool of identities you'll find among the companions of the Prophet. That's a beautiful thing. So I guess to that point, to start off, no, it's there's not one way, I guess, to build a Muslim personality. There's a base. Now, here's the other thing. This is how we need to balance this discussion out. You know, yeah, certain doors will open in my way that are unique to me, or to unique to certain individuals. But there's a certain baseline that it would be good for me to have, and to have a very comprehensive Islamic personality. Because what happens is when people, quote unquote, aspire to become closer to Allah and become more religious, is they might go through some type of identity crisis, follow this group, take this course, get involved in this form of service, or in one form of service or another, but they might not really have balance to that journey, a holistic perspective, I guess you could say. And that could be to their detriment. It could be, and that's why, the perspective needs to be had on, what's important in terms of how I should use my time. So I guess that's how I would frame it. We could go into the details. I don't know where you want to go from here next, but I'll pass it back to you. See, you could.
Yeah, I mean, I think I asked about as broad of a question as one could ask, right? But I think I just wanted to kind of get the initial thoughts of how you start to approach the question. I think that was
Sure.
better than even I was hoping for. But I think one of the examples that kind of stood out to me is the mother. You just said the mother who raised a great child. So in that sense, you would call that mother an ideal Muslim. So the ideal Muslim can be just a great mother, and not just in any sort of negative tone about that, but something like that, for example. It doesn't always have to be like that. I guess then, okay, so how
That could be her forte, right? And that doesn't take, some people, when they look at the masjid, if I'm not behind a microphone, if I'm not speaking to people, if I'm not teaching, I feel like I'm not really offering anything. But that's not true. That's not true at all. So that it's to that point, I guess you could say. It's definitely could be her forte in area of strength. Alongside that, I'm sure what made her that great mother was certain things went into her personal development that made her someone who had a seasoned perspective, a wise approach, some depth of understanding, if you know what I mean. There's a beautiful statement in Arabic that says, "فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه." One who is void of something cannot pass it on to another, cannot inspire another with it. If I'm void of it, so what really needs to go into my personality so that I could perhaps be in position to capitalize on my strengths? That's what we're saying.
Well, so then what about then? So then each person can look at their strengths, but what about then they say, okay, well, I look at my role models, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I look at his seerah, and I mean, he literally was involved in everything, right? And if I'm supposed to be striving to be like him, is in that can't that lead to a mindset of I need to be involved in everything? And if is that a good mindset, or is that traumatic? Is that the wrong way of looking at trying to follow the sunnah?
I think of course the Prophet ﷺ is the model for the companions and for every single one of us. But our realities have their limitations, and even if I should strive to be as close as I can to the Prophet ﷺ's example, naturally, you'll find that certain aspects of life. So the Prophet ﷺ had as comprehensive a personality as you can imagine. but certain aspects of life stand out to different people. Like, for example, Umar and justice. Umar, because of his, physical build, his shrewdness, and his intelligence, he was the emblem of justice for the ummah. That's something that just, it was something that opened itself, an opportunity that opened itself before him. The likes of Abu Bakr, radiallahu anhu, the Prophet Sallallahu first, I guess you could say, one of his first financial supporters and aides, and the Prophet Sallallahu right hand, and the one who had the coolness that was needed to use the strength and power of Umar. If you could say, their personalities balanced each other out. So Sayyidina, and that's why, when the Prophet ﷺ put him in position to lead the prayer, when he was about to pass away, his daughter didn't want him to lead, because she knew that leading the prayer meant filling the Prophet's role, and she didn't want it for her father, because she knew that he had a very soft heart. And she said to the Prophet, my father is someone who weeps in prayer, and he weeps a lot, and he has a very soft and tender heart. Put someone else who, has the capacity to deal with the difficulty of the position. But the Prophet ﷺ insisted, because he knew that the ummah needed an Abu Bakr immediately after the Prophet ﷺ, and it needed a Umar after Abu Bakr. So that's what I'm trying to say. I guess, in this regard, it's like, you'll find, I need to invest certain things. I'm not going to be able to do everything, but in order to develop a Muslim identity, I need to have something like ilm and knowledge. I need to have that as part of my pursuit, because you find countless verses in the Quran highlighting that. أفلا يعقلون, don't they reflect? أفلا يعلمون, don't they know? أفلا يتذكرون, aren't they reminded? انظروا, observe, reflect. You find many verses in the Quran in this vein. So وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا, and say, oh Allah, increase me in knowledge. That means every Muslim needs to have some type of intellectual endeavor at varying degrees. I might not become a scholar or an academic, but I need to have enough knowledge that I can at least assure myself that what I'm doing is in line with what Allah's pleasure is. And the same thing with knowledge. I need amal, right? I need action, activism, involvement, because that's what made the Prophet ﷺ's life so great, was his service of others. His life was lived for others, and that's why his life carried such great meaning. So that's more of, okay, I need to have amal, I need to have knowledge, I need to have worship, right? I need to have family relationships, I need to have community relationships, I need to work on, my personal growth in terms of, my efforts in funding my livelihood and my family, and supporting them financially, because the Prophet ﷺ says the best money earned is the hard-earned cash by the individual's own hard work. That's a hadith of the Prophet. That needs to go into my personality as a Muslim. So that's what I'm trying to get at basically here. You'll find that certain things pull and stand out more than others, but there needs to be a baseline from all this. Because what happens is, sometimes people, when they become religious, they automatically translate it in a certain way. Oh, that means I need to do more worship. I need to fast more. I need to pray more and read more Quran, but that's not enough. And for other people, it's like, okay, I need to, volunteer in different things, and that's going to be my relationship with my religiosity. It's beautiful, but it's not enough. If I don't invest that time in actually gaining certain understandings and perspectives and knowledge, then perhaps a lot of things I might end up doing might actually be in violation of what Allah wants of me. So that's what I had in mind, Akhi Ahmed.
So I think then part of the insight there that I think was new is, I mean, again, in the idea of these three buckets again of spiritual knowledge and amal, or works, I guess is the best translation. One should still focus on having some sort of involvement in all three. Even though we say you don't have to be in everything in the world, but those three elements are critical for someone to be in to have a comprehensive. The phrase you use is Muslim identity. I don't know if but a comprehensive Muslim life, we'll just call it, or the strong Muslim life, and a realistically ideal Muslim life, one way or another. Whether your strength is being a great mother, whether your strength is being stern and strong with justice like Omar, whether your strength is being merciful like Abu Bakr, whatever it is, or whatever, and all the examples that you gave. But underneath all of that, if we start to talk about what are some of the things that are going to be required across the board, those three elements have to be involved, and one should focus on making sure those three elements are involved. Is that fair?
Yeah, so I would say knowledge is definitely there. Action is definitely there. And I would also say, what was the third one that you mentioned?
The spiritual aspect.
Spiritual is definitely there, and I guess the translations of that need to be clear in mind. Like, what do we mean by that exactly, and how does that translate? So, if spirituality means, all right, I'm always in the masjid praying in the first row for every Isha, but it doesn't translate to my behavior and character, forget that, it's out the window. That's a essential component of what spirituality means. Like, so actually understanding what these things translate to in my personal life, that's key. Character, khuluq, the nearest of you to me on the day of judgment, the most beloved of you to me, as the Prophet ﷺ says, are those who have beautiful character. إن من أحبكم إلي وأقربكم مني مجلسا يوم القيامة أحاسنكم أخلاقا. So that's a critical thing there. You know, I need to perhaps redefine certain things if they end up being applied in a superficial way in my life. Because ibadah has a certain beginning and a certain end, something sought from it. One of those things that's sought from ibadah, worship, is change of behavior, change of character. In that discussion needs to be the role of family and the role of community, because the Prophet had those as integrals, and so did the companions, the integrals in their lives. How some of these uh, ideals, faith ideals, and their principles, the values, translate to my family dealings. That's something that is part and parcel when it comes to action and amal. So I guess you could say those are that's the skeletal structure, what you mentioned: knowledge, action, spirituality. When you come to action and amal, does that mean being involved in relief efforts and soup kitchens and all the rest, and doing good stuff for the general public? Yeah, of course, that's a beautiful part of it. But amal also means the way I deal with my friends, with my family. Amal also translates into my involvement in community. One of the things I mentioned in the khutbah today, there are some people who they bring goodness along with them wherever they go. They're like doors to goodness. When you meet them, they make you happy. They just relieve you of some stress that you have in your mind. There are other people, they bring harm along with them wherever they go. That when they walk through the door, they just bring depression, anxiety, stress, problems, conflict, feuds, turmoil, all the rest. And that's of course an awful thing to have as a character. But if you see what I'm saying, how do these things translate? And then when it comes to knowledge, what knowledge should I have? That's something that needs to be, I guess you could say, picked apart and broken down. What knowledge do I need? Is it academic knowledge? Is it the life of the Prophet? Is it fiqh? What's a fard ayn, an individual obligation? What's a community obligation, fard kifaya? How can I build my intellectual personality, at least on a baseline level, something that every Muslim should have, not what you need to become a sheikh. And then how can I build my activist personality? What does it relate to specifically? And then how can I build my spiritual identity? All of these three need to be picked apart and broken down and detailed. Wallahu alam.
Okay, I think that I see a good path forward here for some discussion here. I think we should try to pick apart some of them here. So there's those three topics. I don't know if you're going to disagree. I think I'm going to add your character, or the way of, we'll just call it the way of your being throughout life, like character, as a fourth bucket. I think it sounds like those are the four. You put under spiritual. Maybe we'll just put it that way. That there's the spiritual part. There's the deeds, the works with the people. There's the what was the third one? The spiritual, that works the people, and the knowledge, and then this fourth one, and then your overall character throughout life. I think those elements are the elements that an ideal Muslim would have, and then we can delve into all four of those maybe a little
Sure.
bit.
Yeah, things relating to the mind, body, soul, basically.
So, but okay. So quickly though, before we get into those though, so I mean, I guess even just to start off about like why we should even go that far. So, um, so first of all, so we're trying to figure out what is the obligations, what do we want to do. So if someone, let's say they want to be a good Muslim, I always say, like, if someone wants to be a good Muslim, what they're really trying to do, and I'm asking more, not saying this is the way, but the way one would think about it, if someone's trying to be a good Muslim, they're developed a connection with Allah, and they're asking, what does Allah want from me? That should be the mindset of someone who's trying to be an ideal Muslim, is they're asking, what does Allah want from them, and trying to figure out what that is and live life that way. And the answer is, I think you're giving, is that there's these four, and live life in these four areas the way that we have the guidance to do so. But then, so I guess before we go there, do you want to comment on that? I was going to get into the question, but
Yeah, sure. I could comment on that. So what does Allah want from me? Seeking Allah's pleasure is absolutely the guiding light. And I completely agree. It's the guiding light for the believer in my decision making process. What's factored into my decision making process in life? That's something important to consider. Because based on my priorities, my principles, my ideals, my values, that the answer to that question is going to be very different, right? So what's factored into my decision making process? Well, where does it stand from halal and haram? That's one thing to figure out. What's allowable and what's prohibited. If we check that off the list, well, where does it stand from what's optimal and most pleasing to Allah? They're two different things, right? So some people, they just, when they come for seeking guidance, they just want a fatwa that enables them to do what they want, and as long as it's halal, then it's fair game. But of course, that's not the way it works. Along with that, I'm seeking what's optimal, what's ihsan oriented, what's best, what will actually bring me closer to achieving Allah's rida. That if that checks off the list, then have I consulted an advisor, a trusted advisor, a mentor, a teacher? If that checks off the list, then we go to the next thing after that, which is how practical, how possible is it for me to implement what I'm looking for in a fashion that actually fits into my life narrative in terms of my relationships and my family. Some people, there's so many things to address in this regard. Some people, they want to do something beautiful, but and they just think of a great idea. You know what? I want to just pick up and leave, and I want to go abroad and study or something like that. But perhaps it might cause their family a great deal of heartache and pain, and so that beautiful thing that checks off everything else on the list might not fit their life narrative, and it might cause actually a lot of difficulty for those around them, and so on and so forth. And you could think of many other things, like, for example, in business or in financial investments, that you could also use as examples. Something might be halal, something might be optimal, but it might not necessarily, and something might be advisable, but for me specifically, it may not be advisable because of my life narrative. Like, for example, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam receiving the entire money that Abu Bakr had saved from his personal savings, and he asked him, "What have you left for your family?" He said, "I left for them Allah and His Prophet." And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepted that from the likes of Abu Bakr, but many others because of their life circumstance being very different, and their responsibilities and the nature of their family being very different. That would not be acceptable. كفى بالمرء إثما أن يضيع من يعول. It's enough of a sin for someone to make those who are their dependents in vain. So again, like this is like the decision-making process. This is something that I should take notes on. I should write this. All right, how do I make decisions in my life? Do I make them haphazardly, or do I make them with some depth of understanding? There's some things you could add to that list that might be user specific to you as a person. You know what I mean? So I guess the thoughts go on and on, but I guess that's some things I would say in that regard.
Okay, so I think you're I think so. I think one of the things we got from that is to really clarify and understand what it is that's our specific path in doing things like that. So I did want to get to before we got to those. So what I was trying to get to is this question here about, okay, so we look at what does Allah want from us, and we look at then what are the obligations. And I think these two stories kind of give an interesting thing. So one is maybe one story will do enough, but and I'm going to summarize the story. And Shiv, please correct me if I'm categorizing the story wrong. It's the idea there was the one time that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and it asked him. He became a Muslim. He said, like, what is your religion? And it's what do you have to do? He goes, you have to testify that I'm the Prophet ﷺ and La ilaha illallah. And they said, okay, what else? And then he basically told him the 5 pillars. And he goes, okay, what else? And then he said, you have to stay away from the major sins. And the man was like, harsh. He goes, okay, and then what happens if I do that? He goes, I'll do that, but I won't do anything more, or something like this. And then the Prophet said, okay. And then after the man walked away, the Prophet said, if the man does that, he will get Jannah. So if I think that I said that at least the gist of the story right. If I didn't get it totally right. If that and then there's that other story. Well, I think that one story makes the point is why should we even want to do more than those basics? I mean, if we know that will get you Jannah, why not just and I think a lot of people sometimes have that as in the first place. Like, why isn't the idea most just I stayed away from my major sins, I do my 5 pillars, aren't I doing everything I'm supposed to do?
That's a really good question. The for that specific person, there's particulars to that interaction he had with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam knew this person. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam realized that person's stage. Again, remember that person was just taking his shahada. They were just entering into the religion. They were very new, based on the tradition. They were very new to Islam, and that actually gives us a lot of insight, because the Prophet ﷺ had a great deal of wisdom in understanding who was in front of him and understanding what was most meaningful for the person I'm dealing with now. And that's a lot that we could learn a lot from that, because when someone's just coming into the religion or new to the practice, they might hear a lot of different concepts, ideas, ideologies, different, perspectives on things, and it might be extremely overwhelming. And understandably so, because as the Prophet ﷺ himself says, "In hadha dina mateen, fa'ughil fihi birifq." This religion is vast and mighty and strong and deep, so tread in it very gently and easily. That not everyone's going to have the same capacity to do different things. And I need to slowly build myself up to where I hope to be, appreciating the role of my state, my current stage, and my growth, my personal growth. And you know what? And that relates to the subject of what I should take my time, I invest my time. It's not really a call to make that your standard, by the way. That's not what it is. It's not meant to say, all right, well, you know what? It was good enough for that guy, so I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to do the bare minimals. The Prophet ﷺ says in another hadith, تقدموا فأتموا بي لا يزال قوم يتأخرون حتى يؤخرهم الله. Come and follow me. Come to the front rows. He was speaking to them as he saw some companions sitting in the back. When it was time to stand for prayer, he told them, come close and fill in the gaps, fill in the rows. لا يزال قوم يتأخرون. Some people will continue to lag behind until they're left behind. حتى يؤخرهم الله. That's a very scary reality. So our deen never teaches us to limit ourselves to the bare minimals, but it does teach us to appreciate our current stage in our personal growth. And that's where we talk about fard ayn and fard kifaya, the personal individual obligations and community obligations. When I'm just starting off, it's most pertinent for me to understand what's directly relating to my growth now. And that's what fard ayn is. That's what an individual obligation is. It's going to change based on your stage, right? So fard ayn, individual obligation for someone who's just starting off in life, might be the ibadat, might be some of the ibadat, like it might be their prayers and their fasting, because they don't have money to give zakah yet. But then when they gain money, then that would add on to their fard ayn, their individual obligation. They need to start understanding how to give zakah. And when they get married, they need to understand the rights and responsibilities. That adds on to their fard ayn. And when they have a business, that adds on to their fard ayn, when they start earning a living, to figure out what's halal and what's haram in terms of finances and transacting. And so on and so forth. It continues to grow the more their responsibilities grow in life. So, again, going back to your question, what do I need to focus on? I'm not looking to become a sheikh. I don't have the time and the capacity to take a whole lot of courses. Well, you know what? That's okay. But remember this, one of the greatest and most efficient ways to Allah Azza wa Jal is by using the mind and intellect. And no matter who I am, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to be a reflective person. Allah wants me to be a person who uses my faculties. I observe, I listen. I use my mind for fikr along with dhikr, for reflection along with remembrance, and so on and so forth. So that's an essential component to my life. Why should I do this? Because the more my understanding grows, the more the usage of my mind and other faculties grows, the more that I'll find a meaningful interaction with those basic things in terms of my religiosity. Someone who prays with fahm and understanding is not like someone who prays and is completely oblivious and going through the motions, if you want to say.
Okay, so I think one of the big takeaways there is not to. So that specific story is the idea of guidance for someone might be a little bit newer to the faith, and in general, the larger takeaway is taking it easy as far as when you first get into the faith, to take it step by step and take your growth step by step. But by no means should one consider themselves reaching their ideal peak by just beating those 5 pillars and staying away from the major sins and just staying at that level. That would not be a good understanding of what you would be missing your responsibilities at that type of mentality.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think you brought up the communal versus the fard ayn versus the fard kifaya. I think it's a good time to maybe get into that. So I guess, can you first, I know you touched a little bit about what the definition of fard ayn is, but could you maybe explain fard ayn versus fard kifaya, if you think that's useful?
Yeah, sure. So basically, fard ayn, as I was explaining now, is something that's expected of me individually. Fard kifaya, community obligation, is something that needs to be filled on the communal scale. Basically, an example of a fard kifaya would be performance of janazah prayers. That's a fard kifaya, community obligation. That's the funeral prayers. Not everyone needs to attend, but if we have in our community people who are dying and no one at all is asking about them or giving them their burial rights, then we're all liable. We're all blameworthy for that, every single one of us. Another example of a fard kifaya would be learning certain aspects of knowledge, like whether it's tajweed, learning the perfection of recitation of the Quran. It's not something that everyone needs to know, but it's a knowledge that we need to preserve because it's a means to preserve the Quran. Another example of a fard kifaya would be learning medicine and learning how to treat the ailments of the body, because if no one in a community does that, then it will not bode well for the community. When people get sick, they won't have people to care for them efficiently. That's an example of a fard kifaya, a community obligation. It's a very vast term, but one of the takeaways from it is we complete each other. You might not have it all on a personal level, but the quicker I realize that and I actually complete myself with my brother or with my sister, the better I'll become as a person. All right. لِيَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا سُخْرِيًّا, that you might make you, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated some over others in this life so that you may find use in each other. If I know that I don't have something, I perhaps may find it in someone else that might perhaps help me in what I need in my personal life. And I need to realize that in order for me to be able to act on it. And you could give other examples along with that in this line. But, so that's one of the takeaways. We complete each other. The second takeaway from it is this idea of community. Again, this idea of togetherness, this idea of the impact of society on the individual and the role of the individual in society. That's something that is so important to this discussion of the ideal Muslim, because you know what? Being a beautiful, kind, and gentle and pleasant person when I'm all alone is one thing. But it's a completely different thing than when you put that beautiful, nice, courteous person in difficult situations in community, because that's where their true colors, the content of character comes out. So when I think of the ideal Muslim, that is seasoned by the idea of community. No way can you ever achieve any ideal in terms of your Islam except through that lens of those interactions. That's what comes to mind when I think of community obligation, fard kifaya.
Okay, so I think so. I mean, I think we're all aware of. I think then the fard ayn, the individual obligations, we're aware that those are the obligations. I think most people are aware of their. Well, actually, probably not. Either way, the point is, I think that we got the idea that there's these individual obligations, but then you mentioned again the role of the person to the society is the critical question for understand the ideal Muslim. And I think maybe we can shift to focusing on that part. So we said there's the aspect of knowledge. We could have focused more on that. What does that mean for the ideal Muslim? We could have focused on other things. I think we should take some time, at least for now, and make sure we get into the role of the Muslim in society. And I think all of these, it sounds like from understanding correctly, we can call the role of the Muslim in society all in the category of their communal obligations. None of that is individual obligations. I don't know if it's a bad idea to categorize it all in that way.
Can you re-express that? What do you mean?
I guess because if we're talking about what's a person's role to their society, we're talking about things in the category of their communal obligations, not their individual obligations. But I was asking, say maybe it's tricky because we each have individual obligations to the community too, right?
Yeah, no, you can't completely separate them.
Yeah,
My individual obligations actually contribute. I in society or in community am a contributor, and I need to realize that I'm contributing with the things that I'm responsible for before Allah and the things I'm responsible for before people. So like zakat, for example, it's a right of Allah and it's a right of the needy in people in society. It's an individual obligation for those who have it. So that's an example. And you could give other examples, like for example, birr al-walidain, benevolence to parents. That's an individual obligation, right? And the way that the children in society implement that is going to impact society as a whole. because if the children, and of course this might be very telling of our reality, have uquq, and are very rebellious in their relationships with their parents, it can translate to certain things that are very devastating for society. It could tear the fabric of society apart as a whole. But the family institution is in decline. A lot of it is because of the sense of uquq and the sense of individualism that members of the family have. Or it could translate to the treatment of the elderly. So again, it's an individual obligation, but it's going to affect society as a whole, in a certain way. And basically, this subject, the ideal Muslim, very vast subject, as you could all see possibly. It needs a plan for each one of these things. We're talking about community now, as Akhi Ahmed introduced. When it comes to what I should learn and what I should prioritize in terms of what I learn, I need to put a plan. And that plan might need the direction of someone who's an expert. When it comes to building myself up spiritually, I need to put a plan. And that plan will stem from the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ and how he conducted himself spiritually, but it might need the guidance of an expert, right? And also the same thing when it comes to activism. I need to put a plan, and I need to gain perspective. But it involves a great deal of nuance. I'm going to need the direction of an expert. When it comes to community and how to build community and how to maintain community, there's a lot we could learn from the life and example of the Prophet ﷺ. There are certain things that are family killers, community killers. We need to beware of them. How can I build a healthy, community that is conducive for cultivating faith and iman, like the community in Medina, like the society in Medina? Allah.
Okay, so I think now we can start to get into the meat of that. Okay, so then the overall Muslim and what they're trying to do, and they're trying to balance all this stuff. So let's start, I guess, with like a father. So he has family obligations. He has a spouse and kids, and I think you've mentioned many times in lectures before the importance of the fatherhood and putting effort in making sure they're raising their child, for example. And then he has to put effort into making sure he's providing for his family. At the same time, he's saying, I want, I want to have ilm, I want to have knowledge, I want to memorize Quran. And I want to help I want to help the people. I want to be involved in charity work, for example, just as a random thing. But it's impossible. He's thinking there's no way I can handle all of this at once. What should I do? Something's going to be neglected. It seems like it's not a realistic way to live, to be able to handle all these kinds of things. I know you mentioned each one should look at their strengths and things like that. Let's say, they think I can be involved in all these things. I can study, I can learn, I can help with with these organizations. I can, work and raise my family, but I can't do everything.
Yeah, of course, when you look at it like that, you'll understand that there are time limitations. But, it's really important that I cannot just make a conscious decision where I'm just going to remove something from the realm of my focus. That's just not, it's not going to produce the result that's intended. Like if someone decides, what's the big deal? I'm praying, I'm fasting, I'm giving the money that I owe to the needy. I'm living a very private, personal life. Why do I need to do anything else? Why do I need to learn? Why do I need to be an activist or get involved and serve others? I don't want to. I just want to do my prayers, read my Quran, and just have my private, personal life. Well, if I'm going to take that type of approach, I'm going to fall short of the prophetic example big time. That's what it is. It's just giving perspective. When we're talking about knowledge, we don't mean production of a scholar or a sheikh. You're talking about, there are certain things that everyone needs to know about their Islam. And it's so important that they do, especially in this reality, because if they don't, they're going to start doubting their Islam. And it's happening. It's happening, by the way. Many young people are questioning and doubting their faith, and they might end up leaving Islam altogether because they don't understand the foundations of Islamic creed. They don't understand the life of the Prophet. When someone comes and says the Prophet's like this and the Prophet did that and the Prophet had this type of manner of dealing with his adversaries and so on and so forth, they won't know how to answer because they don't know the identity of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's one of the foremost responsibilities, foremost rights of the children, that their parents teach them about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So learning about seerah, that's a fundamental. Learning about the book of Allah. You know what? Some people, I get this sometimes when people come and well, I want my children to learn about their Islam, and I want to put them in a Quran class so they could learn how to recite and they could learn how to read Arabic. And the children are like in their teens and they don't know a thing about their faith, and they might very well have doubts about their Islam, and they might announce some of those doubts to their parents. My answer is, well, please, for the love of your children, for the sake of your children, that's not necessarily so that's exactly what we mean. Those discussions need to happen. The parent might think, well, that's what it means. I need to do my role. I need to teach them how to read Quran. No, the greater responsibility now is to make sure you address this doubt that he has in his heart about Islam. That you build a sense of love in his heart. That's what it means when we're talking about building the mind. So building the mind, certain discussions need to happen. Building the body and the activism, the role, if I never once train my children to give back to others, to be servants of those in need, to servants of the community, how do you think they're going to become? Do you think they're really going to be attached to a sense of, and it's going to be to their detriment? See, that's the thing. When I teach my son or daughter to give charities, to be a part of relief efforts, to, have in their mind the fuqara and those people who are homeless living in this. When I teach them to prioritize that, then I'm doing wonders in terms of building their personality. That type of activism needs to be part of everyone's life. Yeah, they're not going to be like volunteering their weekends every weekend. Yeah, they're not going to be in like 2-3 courses a semester, but I need to at least develop a baseline, because if I don't, it's going to really corrupt them. And that's why I always say this, when someone gives or does for others, they're the first beneficiary of their service. Absolutely the first beneficiary of the service. So we're building a personality, not necessarily spreading myself so thin in terms of the amount of time I have, if you know what I mean, right? It needs wisdom, it needs a little bit of understanding. And you know what, if I don't have that know-how, there's so many people who I could have that discussion with. I should seek someone to have that discussion with. How should I invest my children's free time? Hold on.
Okay, so it sounds like really people should push themselves a little bit too. I'm actually getting a sense of that, because it's more of, yes, you should be making sure you're putting the effort to getting to giving the time for your children, to make sure you're raising them to have the right type of Islamic mindset and life mindset. And yes, at the same time, you yourself should make sure you're putting in the effort in the community and doing what you can for others and all that as well. And one should really not use "I have too much this" or this as an excuse. Yeah, the Muslim can push themselves a little bit more than that as an attitude. One thing that's interesting is about, as far as like where to put the effort, it just came to me the idea of the fard kifaya. I mean, so the interesting part is about the communal obligations. It's talking about an obligation that just somebody in the community has to do. And I think that it sounds like there's a guiding light there, that like when one should look about what they should do, they should be looking for this is a question, but they should be looking for what the unmet need is in the community and put their effort there. And that seems to be like one of the that's the message of the fard kifaya, is look where there is something, an unmet need, make sure you're solving this. And even if it's not necessarily your favorite thing to do or your passion, if one wants to look about being the ideal Muslim, they should look at what is missing as far as obligations the community has to be done, that I need to make sure are getting done, versus the other thing. Is that, I don't know if you want to touch on that. I guess it was a little less of a statement, more of a statement, less than a question, but.
No,
If I guess is that
I
right? I
agree.
guess.
I agree with the sentiment. It's a beautiful point. The where's the unmet need, and even if you don't like to, necessarily do that, if you could fill the void, that's beautiful. And and if you can't fill the void, at least get people on board who are interested in that type of thing, who can fill the void. Yeah, alhamdulillah, that's one of the beautiful things about, in life. You're going to find all different types of personalities: introverts, extroverts, people who are very social, people who are academic, people who are very generous, people who are, very spiritual. You're going to find all different types of people. And alhamdulillah that, community, if we get all the right people on board and inspired and at least have a baseline involvement in those types of things, a lot of good things can happen. And we could complete each other in that regard. Yeah.
Okay. Um, I want to touch. I think this is a good time to talk about the idea is about if there is a difference. If you have any thoughts about the difference, if there is one, between the ideal Muslim man and the ideal Muslim woman, and they should be approaching this from two different viewpoints, or
Yeah, very good question. Is there a difference between the role of, or I guess you could say, in what goes into developing a beautiful identity for a Muslim man and a beautiful identity for a Muslim woman? And the answer to that is yeah, absolutely. The different things go into that based on, gender equity, and like how, each person, I guess each gender in their own way is involved in different, in their own personal capacity, in terms of family, in terms of community. There's a lot of shared among that, because you'll find a lot of diversity even among the, like we said, even, not all males are the same in terms of their abilities and their talents, and not all females are the same in terms of their abilities and their talents and their time, and so on and so forth. But there are certain things that are gender specific, that, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed as part of our existence, like, when it comes to, a beautiful Muslim identity. I think a beautiful thing would be to have a sister in that type of discussion to describe some of the challenges that are common for Muslim sisters in the West today. Because our sisters do have their own specific challenges that are very different than brothers. And to understand those challenges, and how can I basically navigate those challenges, and represent, and live the most beautiful, aspects of my faith today, is a very important thing. When you listen to some of our sisters and how they have such a very empowering perspective on the idea of hijab, and how it actually, inspires their interactions with those around them in society today. It could be very, very, very touching. Or when it comes to the idea of fatherhood and motherhood, manhood, womanhood, there's certain discussions that need to have, that need to be had with our children on, with our boys, on, how to be men, how to be men. What does it mean to be a man? In terms of, my care and my service for my family, and my care and my service for my spouse, for my wife, for my sisters, my perspective, and on responsibility, that, and same thing with our sisters, motherhood, and all that it entails. It's a very beautiful thing, definitely very gender specific. The relationship of a mother with her children is always going to be very different than the relationship of a father, not with the children as well. There's a certain, special thing there that, I guess you could say, and our sisters would articulate this better, that the man would never have. We could go in so much detail in that regard, but I think, that just gives an idea that there is a discussion to be had, in terms of the challenges of brothers, challenges of sisters, in our day and age, and how we could really aspire for the best versions of ourselves. Wallahu alam.
okay. And it sounds like you don't want to delve too much into this without. It sounds like you feel like it would be better to delve into a topic like this with a sister present in the discussion. It sounds like, but just to follow up at least one more time, then if you'd rather not have that discussion without a sister present, it's fine. But I think part of the direction I was getting at is, I mean, and I think you touched about there's different, what does it look like for an ideal Muslim man versus woman? About the primary responsibilities, I had heard at some point something along the lines of the primary male responsibility, and I guess this is vague and off of memory, but I guess the context was after your basic obligations, the primary male responsibility is jihad in the sense of taking steps towards the political success of Islam. And I could be wrong in that. And that the primary responsibility for women on the counterpart stage is preserving her hayat. And that is the primary test that Allah put for a woman. Am I totally off base in this, in even categorizing these dramatic differences?
Yeah, I wouldn't really characterize it like that. I would say that there's much more to it than that. I would say, that there are multiple responsibilities for a male today, and there are multiple responsibilities for a female. Preservation of hayat is actually, we could leave this for another episode of the Community Hub, but is actually something for both males and females. This concept of hayat and modesty is something that's so far-reaching. It's definitely not gender-specific whatsoever. Even though certain aspects of it might manifest in women different than it would in males. That's true. But for me, what I think of when I think of responsibilities of men, it's what duties do I have as a husband? That's one question. How can I be a good brother to my sisters? How can I be a good father to my children? What rights do my children have upon me as a father? Am I a money bank? In that I'm only the financial provider and I'm not even involved in tarbiyah. What responsibilities in terms of discipline does the father have towards the children? Those are a bunch of different things that are relating to family in terms of responsibility. When it comes to the whole greater society and politics and everything, we have many Muslim women who are actually involved in that in the capacity of activism and are very outspoken in terms of representing the general Muslim body, especially in the West. So when it comes to female responsibilities, you could include in that discussion about what are the characteristics of an ideal mother. What are the challenges of our sisters in engaging in general society? What rights do my husband have upon me? And so on and so forth. So there's different responsibilities for both, and I think a meaningful discussion could be had about both, but it's of course a lot of detail. So I guess to pick that apart, it would need perhaps its own session. Allah.
Yeah, I guess always the topic of man versus woman is just a very large topic that always it's its own topic. It can never be answered in one question. I'm sure. Yeah, and yeah, I think the idea of the fact that there are women, especially in the West here, and Muslim women heavily involved in politics in the West is kind of part of the impetus for that question, right? And I guess I was keeping that specific. So I guess now it's maybe a good time to see. So I guess first I want to talking about the specific time and place now. I guess so. The first thing is when we talk about the ideal Muslim, what their roles and responsibilities are. Is there are the roles and responsibilities consistent regardless of the time and place and the situation you're in, or are those roles and responsibilities depending on the time and place that you are in?
For men and women, you said?
Yeah, so I guess not specifically on the man-woman question. I guess it was just that since you brought up the woman in politics things, that just made me think of a today issue. So I was like, so it's time to talk about. Should we talk about things in the sense of, well, what about in the specific world we live in today? Because I think we were talking about kind of specific so far.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Circumstance definitely plays a huge role in terms of defining my responsibilities. Someone who's single is definitely not like someone who's married in terms of the way they need to manage their time, in terms of the rights and responsibilities they have. And that goes for both males and females. Someone who's married it has its own challenges and responsibilities. Someone who has children, even more, especially someone who has children who are at the age where they're very impressionable and they're learning a lot from their surroundings. A lot of rights and responsibilities there. So it definitely changes based on circumstance. It also definitely it changes based on time and place and ability. You'll find that I'll give you an example. They mention in the books of fiqh that for a scholar, they have the discussion: what's better for a scholar and a mufti, to pray 2 rak'ahs sunnah, nafil prayers, or to dedicate time towards knowledge. They say that what's most virtuous for that specific person is actually dedicating more time towards knowledge, because that's a door that Allah opened for them, and they're benefiting the ummah so much more. The benefit of it is extending to others. Whereas the sunnah would be limited to, or I should say, not the sunnah, the nafil prayers would be limited to themselves. And you could use that as a sample, that you could, as an example that you could apply in other situations, because for some people, some of our sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, had made their circumstances in life, or perhaps they made certain choices in their personal life where, they are dedicating themselves to beautifying their homes and raising their children. They're stay-at-home mothers, and of course that's a very beautiful endeavor in itself. It's not something that takes away from the woman's status in any way. But for perhaps some others, might Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might have given them certain access and ability to a certain education, where they learned certain things that most people wish they could have learned, or dedicated, or gotten a degree in a certain field that is so crucial. And you'll find this, by the way, historically. There's perhaps a misconception that in pre-modern times, women had absolutely no role in academics, and no role in greater society. And that's a big falsity, because during the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself, there were many women who were actively involved academically, socially. The Prophet ﷺ gave them responsibilities and positions of influence. So it's definitely going to change based on the person's abilities and the person's time and place. Absolutely. Yeah.
Was there, I mean, again, and I didn't mean to dwell too much on the woman part, but I think you brought up the example there. Was there examples of women in the actual ruling government of the Prophet ﷺ, or of the four Khulafat?
Well, the Prophet ﷺ's model of government it's a big discussion. It's not like our model of government. It
Right.
wasn't like, or we had different, it's not like we had a checks and balances system where you had they had the shura, the Prophet ﷺ would consult them in affairs. And actually, in that sense, there were women he consulted, and among them were his wives. If you remember correctly from the story of the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, Sulh al-Hudaybiyah, when the Prophet ﷺ instructed the companions to get out of their ihram, because they were not able to perform the rituals in that year. They did not immediately comply, and the Prophet ﷺ was really worried. So he consulted his wife. I think it was, if I remember correctly, it might have been Salama, if I remember correctly. But so in that sense, she was a consultant to the head of state, because the Prophet ﷺ was the head of state, but he didn't have like a system of government like we have today. In later generations, they did have that role, where there was documentation of women having positions of power in Hisbah, for example. And there in Hisbah is like in the authority and the rule of law. And there's also documentation of disagreement among the jurists about having a female judge in the judicial system, and the Hanafi school, one of the most implemented schools historically, allowing that. And a lot of detail in that regard, but that's not really our discussion. But I guess that they give some insight into it. Even historically, you'll find that there was that example. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think you were just trying to give an example in general about time and place mattering and things like that. I guess I just followed up on that one second. Okay. So I guess let's talk about the time and place. And I don't know how much longer you want to go, by the way.
Maybe perhaps I think people are going to, if they didn't get tired already, they're probably going to get tired very soon. So
Okay.
maybe we could wrap it up in the next few minutes. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe like, so you want to do like one more question or something?
Sure. Sure.
Okay. Um, so yeah, I guess as we said, this is a very broad topic, so it's very high brush strokes on everything. I think, but I guess just to get onto the idea of the specific time place. So I guess the time and place we're just to ask about then, if a few words on the ideal Muslim in 21st century America, right?
Yeah.
And again, the situation I think we're in, that we're I think it's a very unique time that for the past, since the 1924 or whatever the date was when the Ottoman Empire fell, it's a very unique time in that there is no possible example of any sort of even impression of a uniting group of the Ummah, even if it's loose and just for show. But there's nothing even like that's the first time that everything has been fully divided. Things have unraveled even worse since that 100 years. I think there's really not much debate, right, amongst everyone. Everyone kind of looks at the Muslim world and looks at it right now that the Muslim world is upside down, right? And everywhere around there's people being, tortured and hurt and hardship in a lot of places, except for very few places. I would say certainly in the United States, at least from my experience, if you're a U.S. born Muslim, very little hardship. I would say personally, I've faced little as for my Muslimness. That's not the
Okay.
word, but anyway. So I think sorry, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead. What?
So I guess this unique situation, if you're a person in the United States in 21st century where the Ummah's upside down, and you're looking at what is it the ideal Muslim, and so if you look at what is the ideal Muslim, how should one start think about where they should prioritize things, given the dire situation in the world right now? Especially we look at things we know, of course, the idea that we were supposed to be the Ummah's one body. When one part's hurt, we're all hurt, right? And granted, so we have to be like one of the very few body parts that's not hurt, but virtually every other part is hurt. And overall, it seems like things are getting bad. A lot of our kids are getting lost, like you said. You even said yourself, a lot of kids are saying they're leaving their religion sometimes. It's a very dichotomous situation, right? At one angle, you see a lot of Muslims getting stronger and getting better, and we're seeing this revival at one sense. But at one sense, we see things a lot of principles of Islam are getting lost in the mainstream especially in the West too as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's just a lot of turmoil. So I think if you have any thoughts about specifically if talking about these principles of being the ideal Muslim and what your responsibility should be to the community, especially in this specific time.
Jazakallah khair. I appreciate that question. It's definitely a big question, and if I was to answer it, I would answer it in an episode where we would, I guess, start off by understanding the needs of the present day and the challenges that the Ummah and the community and Muslims in the West are facing. And then I guess draw links between that and some of the religious guidance and inheritance that we have in terms of how we should react to that reality. Like at the top of the list, like based on your question, would be in this time especially, to I guess build within the up and coming generation and within our communities this idea of having concern for humanity and concern for the ummah. Actually thinking about the challenges that people in other parts of the world are going through. That's an important part of building the ideal Muslim, quote unquote. An individual who's concerned for what his brothers and sisters in Egypt or in Gaza, Palestine, Syria, Yemen, our Uyghur brothers and sisters, Iraq, and Kashmir and other places, what they're going through. Building a sense of empathy within the heart is something that's very prophetic. The Prophet ﷺ was a very empathetic person. The Prophet ﷺ showed great deal for the concerns, showed great concern for the challenges of others, and that's definitely something. I guess drawing the link between our religious teachings and our experiences today is something really critical. Being relevant to the times, understanding what's happening in people's personal lives, and that's an important part of what's going to contribute to developing the ideal Muslim, a relevant Muslim who understands the challenges of youth, the challenges of family today, the challenges that people are going through in terms of their mental health, in terms of their addictions, in terms of their friendships, and so on and so forth. So all of that is real critical, but there's just so much to talk about there. Not enough time, unfortunately, but perhaps it could be its own thing, its own episode at a certain point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all these questions. We're starting off such a broad topic, and every question about it is going to be an even broader topic. So I think even just the ideal thing which we got, which was nice, is getting you a framework to even how to start to think about it, which is useful. Okay, so then I think that was probably then the last thing we should close off on. So I guess from my end, I'll just remind everyone again to please keep an eye out for upcoming events at the masjid. I believe we do hope that they're going to open up soon, but nothing is in stone, so please don't quote me on that. But I believe that there's plans it should be opening up soon. And for Ramadan, there is a plan. Not a plan. There is a hope. I think that everything should still be in person. I think that's fair to say, inshallah. We'll hopefully have more topics like this in future community hubs. And Sheikh, if you have anything else to say before we close.
Jazakallah khair, Akhi Ahmad. I really enjoyed the discussion. I hope you guys, wherever you are, enjoyed it. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from the effort. And hoping to see you guys in person again very soon at the community hub, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Jazakallah.
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.